Welcome to Trust Talk. Is trust in experts really declining, or is it changing? In this episode, Columbia University professor Gil Eyal challenges the common narrative that we've simply stopped trusting science and expertise. Instead, he explains how trust exists in tension with blind faith on one side and skepticism on the other. Trust isn't just about believing in expertise, it's about knowing when to trust and when to question. Gil explores why timing plays a crucial role in trust. He discusses how expertise has become entangled with politics, why public confidence in institutions is fragile, and what it takes to restore credibility in an age of uncertainty and conflicting information. He also warns that trust itself has become a commodity, something marketed and sold by corporations, consultants, and institutions seeking legitimacy. Your host, Severin DeWitt.
Gil, welcome to Trust Talk. As a professor of sociology at Columbia University, your work covers a broad field that includes what you call the sociology of expertise. What do you mean by that?
So usually when we say expertise, we think something that experts have, but I think that's kind of a limited way to think about it because you don't see expertise. What you see is the results of it. Namely, you see that certain tasks are performed better, faster than when it's not there. So expertise is sort of a capability that underlies the speedy, superior, successful performance of tasks. And what I'm suggesting is that when we think about this capability, we have to include not just the flesh and blood, credentialed, recognized experts, but everything else that is involved in that. So a doctor is not a good expert without a stethoscope. A doctor is also not a good expert without a nurse. A doctor is also not a good expert without a patient who provides the doctor with a credible account of their symptoms. So what I mean by sociology of expertise is the study of this network that includes the credential experts, but all the devices involved as well, and the contribution of lay people, and the contribution of all other auxiliary experts, as you know, as one thing that underlies the performance of tasks.
You are also involved in what's called the Trust Collaboratory at Columbia University.
Yeah.
Can you briefly explain what that organization does?
Okay, so to call it an organization is a bit of an exaggeration. It's me and another guy.
Oh,
you know,
all right.
It's two permanent members of the Trust Collaboratory, and then, a cloud of like 10 to 20 people who are involved to some extent. The idea behind this was as follows, that we hear a lot about mistrust today, and this is how I got into this 10 years ago, this talk about mistrust in science and experts. And everybody wants to know why it is happening, but I think this is the wrong question. Namely, the mistrust is not difficult to understand. It's actually quite understandable. The puzzle is trust. Trust is what is difficult to understand here. Trust is what is hard. So what we do at the Trust Collaboratory is we have a couple of research projects that are geared towards understanding the nature of trust, how it is generated. For example, a study of long COVID patients. How is it that they trust their doctors or other patients or information online? Now, I said research projects, but I am convinced that you cannot study trust from above, so to speak. If I studied trust and then I came to people and I said, I know what is trust, let me tell you, trust me, there would be a problem there. So trust is something that you can only study together with the people that are your research subject. Also partly because trust is something about which we all know. We may not be very articulate about it, but trust is something that we do in everyday life all the time. And so those research projects that we conduct in the Trust Collaboratory are always involving some kind of a co-production, co-design element, working with community members, with stakeholders, work with community health workers, for example, trying to get from them how they think about trust.
Colombia has faced deep divisions, especially after last year's protests related to the war in Gaza. The university started the so-called listening tables initiative. How do these tables create a space for trust and honest conversations on politically sensitive issues?
Okay, so first of all, I should say that was my idea.
Oh, really?
Yes, when things were happening at full swing in the spring, I just felt like I wanted to take a table, put it in the main square, sit there and talk to people. It's not the university that is doing it, it's us, it's a trust collaboratory. If it was understood to be something that is organized by the administration, quote unquote, it would not be trusted. Does it create trust? Well, I think it's still an open question. I mean, the underlying idea is simple, namely that indeed the conflict in Colombia was exacerbated by a lack of trust among students in one another, between the students and the administration, between the administration and the students, among professors, etc. And that to generate trust, you need dialogue. But in order to have dialogue, you have to listen. So you need a commitment to actually listening in order to achieve dialogue, in order to achieve trust. There's usually a professor who moderates the discussion. Then we start by saying, okay, first of all, put your phones away, turn them off. So nobody is afraid that they are being recorded or photographed or that somebody will take notes and report later or something like that. Then we say, start by introducing yourself. Tell us why you're here. What is indeed your take about the issue? But don't give us ideology. Tell us your own experience. What was your experience of what happened in the spring? Did you have friends that you don't talk to anymore? Why? Why did that happen? How do you feel about it? So we wanted people to be rooted in personal experiences because that's the best way to get other people to listen to them without immediately writing them off as you're the other side. This is your ideology. I disagree with you, etc. I think we have moderate success. Everybody who's been to the table comes out, and we did a few surveys and stuff like that, comes out saying this was a great experience. I really loved it. Thank you for doing it, etc. How much of it is left? I don't know. I would say things in Colombia are much better now, not necessarily because of the table. There's a variety of reasons, to the point that we are actually in the process of trying to put together a forum in which Jewish and Palestinian students will actually talk to one another, something that really didn't happen in the spring. It's an experiment.
In your work, you describe the dual meanings of trust, and I think you call them informed anticipation and the other one routinized tacit reliance. Can you explain these terms in simpler language and how these shape trust in institutions and in daily life?
All right. Have you taken a flight recently, Severin?
No? Why?
No. We can all recall our experiences of taking a flight. So, when boarding the airplane, did you ask yourself how confident you were that this was not a risky endeavor? Unless something happened to alarm you, you probably didn't give it enormous amount of thought. And we could say, therefore, that you trusted in a habitual way, as a matter of routine, in a tacit way. And at a certain point, when you look at it from the outside, you can ask yourself, was this trust or was this just blind faith? In fact, no justification for it whatsoever. Or maybe, Severin, you're a very different person than me. And before you fly, you actually do a lot of research. You compare airlines, aircrafts, airports, and times of day to figure out which have the lowest probability of risk. And then you choose your flight to minimize the risk. You can never eliminate it. You always have to trust that you minimize the risk as much as possible. But you do this, therefore, in a what I called informed anticipation. You assessed as well as you could the ability, integrity, and benevolence of the party in which you put your trust. But then again, just as before, we could wonder whether this was really trust or actually mistrust. Namely, you could not trust until you actually saw with your own eyes and you employed so many checks. We would actually in normal everyday life call this, you're a kind of a mistrustful person, very, very skeptical, perhaps paranoid. And what I try to illustrate in this is the fact that what we call trust is something quite ambiguous. If you think about it too little, it becomes not trust. If you think about it too much, it also becomes not trust. I take from this three things. First, that the meaning of the action going on an airplane, whether it is trust or blind faith or informed anticipation or mistrust, is not given in advance. It's not something that you could look at it from the outside and say, oh, this is what it is. It emerges in interaction with others, and it's also part of the individual's presentation of self. We sociologists have this Bible that Irving Goffman wrote in 1959 called The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. And we know that individuals in their interactions are always very, very concerned to manage the presentation of self. And they always think about what would the others think. They always go through this three-way thinking about it all the time. So everybody is concerned to manage their impression and to be seen as trusting responsibly. But also, nobody wants to appear as paranoid either. The second thing I take from this is that how this presentation of self is done is management a lot through time, namely through how you deal with time. If I never flew and then took my first flight ever without giving it any thought, just like going straight on board, that would seem like blind faith. If I done this many times, then I have some track record to draw on. Similarly, if I spent a really long time checking and comparing airlines, that would certainly look like paranoia. So time is a very important part of all this. And the third point that I take from this is that institutions that are trying to project trustworthiness need to take those 2 points that I made into account. They need to create a space in which individuals trusting in them can present themselves as trusting responsibly, and they need to pay enormous attention to the element of time, which they rarely do. I like to say that trust is like music. In music, the speed, the timing, the sequence, all those temporal variables are very important. Like if I play the piano and I play all the notes correctly, but not in the right sequence or not with the right timing, that sounds like a cacophony rather than beautiful piano piece. And the same is with trust. You can do all the right moves, but if you don't do them in the right order, if you don't do them with the right speed and timing, people will not trust you.
You mentioned blind faith a couple of times and also skepticism. Can you share with us an example, like your research on long COVID? Now you are starting talking about that.
Yeah, so we did this research on long COVID patients. First did a survey, and then we interviewed about 100 people who identify as having long COVID. And we asked them something like, do you trust your doctor? When you ask them that in a survey, almost everybody says yes. The only thing that they trusted more was my own research, as they put it. But then, once you start talking to them, once you interview them, you hear enormous amount of reports about terrible experiences with doctors. Saying that they trusted their doctor in a survey was a form of self-presentation. I'm the kind of person who trusts science, trusts experts, trusts doctors. I'm not the kind of person who will tell you immediately, I don't trust them. But if you ask me enough times, then I will have a story to tell you. And that was not just self-presentation for us. It was self-presentations to the doctors that they saw, a sort of a opening move, if you will. And how the doctor handled this initial show of trust impact what followed. Long COVID patients took the time that the doctor spent with them as a sign of whether their trust would be blind faith or something more reasonable. If they came to the doctor and doctor spent 5 minutes and didn't seem to be listening all that much, to put trust in the doctor would be blind faith. And in fact, Once you probe them, you realize long COVID patients were entertained sort of healthy skepticism of doctors' expertise. They often felt that they knew more about their conditions than the doctors. So they looked for signs that allowed them to place trust in doctors because they did want to place trust in doctors. It's not that they didn't. For example, if the doctor listened to them for a long time, that would be a reason. If the doctor told them, oh, you know what, I saw 100 patients like you, and they all said the same thing, that was another reason why you could trust the doctor. If they were referred to the doctor by another patient that they trusted, that was another reason. If the doctor was willing to say, I don't know, this is really new to me, but you know what? I'm going to read about it and come back next week. I will tell you what I found out. Then that was another reason to trust the doctor. And I was especially struck by one woman who had this long diagnostic odyssey, going from doctor to doctor to doctor without a lot of success. And at the end, she goes to see one more doctor, a woman, and she comes in clutching this big folder with all her tests and her research, etc. And the doctor listens to her for 20 minutes and then says, I want you to put down your folder and I want you to let me handle this for you. I believe you. I can see that you're suffering. You can't do this all by yourself. Let us do it together. We're together, we'll get to it. And this gesture wins her trust. And she says, from then onward, this is my doctor. And now you can understand the survey result, right? Yes, I trust this doctor. This is my doctor, and not any old doctor, the doctor I found. And, you could see here that the 20 minutes listening was important. The timing was crucial, but also the odyssey. If somebody told her at the very beginning when she just started going to see the doctors, let me handle it. You don't need to do anything. Don't do research. She wouldn't trust that either. It's only after this very long process. Timing is important because it allows us to tell ourselves and also to present to others that our trust is not blind faith, but is responsible and a reasonable way to proceed.
You wrote The Crisis of Expertise, and we've seen skepticism in debates on anything like nuclear energy, vaccines, Brexit, and many more. What do you think drives this skepticism, and how does it reflect a broader crisis of trust in expertise?
My line on this is that the crisis is not new. It's actually long-standing. If you look at the history of vaccination in the 19th and early 20th century, you see a lot of conflicts and a lot of mistrust. Nuclear energy, you mentioned nuclear energy, struggles about nuclear energy date back to the 1960s. Brexit, well, when did we ever trust economists? I have economist friends, but is it the case? I mean, people do often trust their doctors, but trust economists? I don't know that that was ever the case. I don't think mistrust is the puzzle. Trust is. It's like you can almost say, like, that short period in history when we trusted vaccines, basically from the 1950s to the 1990s, is the mystery, is the interesting part. Yes, I would like to replicate it, but it's not a given that it can happen. My point is also that the mistrust is understandable. A lot of reports in the media focus on the kind of lunatic fringe of mistrust. And yes, that exists, no doubt. But a lot of the mistrust is understandable. Every day, our lives are impacted by decisions that spell out unequal consequences. There are winners and losers. And these decisions are routinely justified by reference to expertise. Pandemic is a good example. It's just a more obvious symptom of this. If I was a small business owner and the state came in and said, sorry, quarantine, nobody leaves their house, all businesses have to close, I'm a clear loser. It's a disaster for me. And as far as I could see, it's not a disaster for other people. Other people are fine working from home. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that decisions for closures and quarantines, all that was wrong. Not at all. I'm in print supporting those decisions. But the unequal consequences are real. And they inevitably create a constituency that questions the expertise involved. Because, you say, why did you close my business? And say, that's what the public health scientist said. So you start questioning that. And when you do, you discover that the expertise is far from being ironclad. If it was, we would not need experts. The German sociologist Niklas Luhmann used to say cynically, an expert is a specialist who is in the position to be asked questions that they cannot answer. What experts deal with is uncertainty. Experts provide advice about what's the best way to act in a situation of uncertainty.
My podcast is about the role of trust. And I've given myself the task of interviewing experts, at least what I believe are experts in their fields. So, can I trust those experts?
Not completely, unfortunately. I'll tell you why. It's because by now, trust has become a little bit of an industry. If you look online, you'll see Deloitte, for example, the large global accounting firm, saying, you have a problem with trust with your work in your workplace? We have the tools, we have a package, to do research on trust and provide you with a workshop that will increase trust in your workplace. And it's also become an academic industry, a journal dedicated to trust research, etc., etc. That actually makes me question whether all this talk about trust is not actually contributing to the crisis. And let me end with one more thing is I do this work with people in Harlem, right? I work with a public health organization in Harlem. And I know from interacting with them, just saying the word trust raises their alarms and they start to mistrust you. Because in their head, they say, oh, now we know why you're here. You never came here before. But now when everybody's talking about mistrust and they say, oh, minorities mistrust science, now you come. So the very talk about trust by now is in itself a symptom or part of the problem.
Well, despite that, Gil, I'm continuing my podcast. Anyway, thanks for being our guest today. Thanks for your insights and wishing you all the best.
You too, Severin. Thank you. And I think I'm not saying that the podcast is part of the problem. Not at all. I think it's great that we get a chance to have this conversation.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Trust Talk. We hope today's conversation inspired new insights into the transformative power of trust. At Trust Talk, we're committed to exploring trust's role in shaping a better world, one story at a time. If our mission resonates with you, we invite you to support us. Your donation, no matter the size, helps us continue these meaningful conversations. Visit us at trusttalk.co/donate to contribute and be part of this journey. Thank you for listening and being part of the Trust Talk community. We can't wait to have you join us again for the next episode.